It was one of the worst wrecks ever in New York history. A nice church excursion down the Hudson River would meet disaster. 1,021 people lost, mostly women and children. Tonight, we talk about one of the worst wrecks in history, and it has almost been forgotten. This was the worst wreck in New York history before the attacks on 9/11 on September 11, 2001. This is the story of the sinking and fire of the General Slocum, and it all happened on June 15th, 1904. It is June of 1904, New York City. New York City has become a booming town, but for several reasons. One reason is the greeting from immigrants from Germany, and they settled into a little town on 6th Street Avenue, which they called it Little Germany. And one historic place was the German Lutheran Church on 323 East 6th Avenue, and this was part of a special church for the German people, as they brought along their religions all the way from Germany to America. And there was a special tribute for this. Every year, the leader of the German Lutheran Church would hire a steamboat for an excursion trip up the East River for a picnic and then back again. On this trip, the steamboat will be a perfect choice. The steamboat taken on this trip will be the best ever built. This steamboat was the fastest of her time, and was the pride of her company. Her name was the General Slocum. General Slocum was built in 1891. She was a side-wheel paddle steamer, the biggest and proudest of them all. The Slocum was 235 feet long, one of the largest ever built in the Brooklyn area. Slocum was 3 decks high and was painted, and her body was painted entirely in white oak and yellow pine. And she even had various cabins, a very spacious room for ladies to sit down and congregate, and a smoking room on board. And she had 2 yellow funnels, one on each side of her body. However, the Slocum had its fair share of incidents. She had several grounding incidents from 1894 to 1902. However, these were not as bad. However, in 1901, on August 17th, a whole bunch of intoxicated people tried to run over the ship. However, she was saved. In June of 1902, she ran aground again. Only this time, the passengers had to camp for the night. However, on June 15th, 1904, the General Slocum would have its worst disaster yet, and it would be the most horrific in New York history before the events of September 11, 2001. The day started out as most usual. There was a party the night before, and many people were just getting up ready for work or for the picnic. Mostly men had to go back to their jobs, so women and children went to the pier to board the ship General Slocum. And it will be a very special occasion, as the leader of the Ladies' Aid Club, which was also part of the church at the time, hugged herself that morning and said, and mentioned there was nothing more better than just a beautiful day for a nice excursion trip. However, only hours later, she would be dead along with 1,020 more. Slocum is under the command of Captain William Henry Van Schaik, who has captained her ever since her main voyage back in 1891, and has commanded her ever since for her 13 years of service. He is one of the most respected captains in the company. However, on this day, he would be the face of several controversial things that would happen that day. That would cost the deaths of so many innocent lives, women and children. General Slocum was one of the most beautiful paddle steamers of her time, but on June 15th, 1904, she would be nothing but a burned-out wreck. The female leader of the church was on board the trip that day, and she was very excited to see so many happy people to join the General Slocum on her trip up the East River. Captain Van Schaik was also excited too. However, one passenger felt uneasy. In fact, so uneasy that right before the ship left, she went in a panic and left the ship as a premonition of what would happen. Many passengers thought that she was just irritated. However, things would get way worse later on that day. The Slocum's destination was Eden's Neck at Long Island, then the return trip. At 9:30, General Slocum departs for Eden Island. On board are 1,342 souls aboard. However, most would end up dead within a couple of hours. As the General Slocum continued her way upriver, everyone's going fine. The children were playing around, women were congregating, and Captain Van Schaik made good progress. However, things weren't going so well in the lamp room. As the Slocum passed 90th Street, a fire was starting to smolder in the lamp room, fueled by oil lamps and hay and oil strewn around the room. Soon the fire started to get worse in the room. Then a 12-year-old boy noticed the incident and ran to the bridge as soon as possible. He told Van Schaik, but Captain Van Schaik didn't believe him, and believed the ship that there was no such thing as a fire, and so told the little boy to get. Then the unthinkable happens. A crewman who saw the boy leaving the room decided to check what was going on. He opened the hatch door, and then fire burst through the door. The lamp room was completely ablaze. The fire was soon fed by oil and paintings all around the ship, and soon the fire began to spread. Some factory workers noticed that there was smoke pouring from the General Slocum in unusual places, not from her smokestacks. However, the passengers didn't seem very concerned. However, in the engine room, things went far worse. As the fire began to get worse, many people the crewmen started strangling around, running around, trying to find out how to stop the fire. They tried to use hoses, but the hoses just came apart. Due to the fact that they'd not been inspected, the hose literally came apart, and water fell everywhere. The firemen in the room knew it was hopeless. The General Slocum was burning. The hose was no effect. It just burst to pieces whenever the water was turned on. And so the firemen knew down below things would get much, much worse. At this point, many of the passengers then realized that fire was going from numerous places. Then everything broke loose, and everything went haywire. Mothers started panicking, looking for their children. Children and babies were screaming out with terror, and the fires was only getting worse as the General Slocum steamed on. What even made it more worse was that many life jackets were strapped above the passengers, which made them pretty much useless. However, the lifeboats didn't even was a good effect. Many mothers put the lifeboats around their children and threw them into the water, only to watch as horror as the lifeboats just disintegrated and their children began to drown. The same thing happened with the adults. The lifeboats just turned into cork dust and fell into the water. Passengers were beginning to die and everything gone haywire. Captain Van Schaik did not know about the fire until 10 minutes after it was discovered. He then heard screaming outside and called down to the engine room. "What's going on there? What's going on down there?" he says. The reply shook him to his core. "There's fire up at the bow, Captain!" Screams the lead engineer. As the engineer and his fellow comrades leave the room, Captain Van Schaik knows what's going to happen. The General Slocum is going to burn up in flames, and many passengers are going to die. He lets out three frantic blasts of General Slocum's whistle to note that they were in serious danger. Many ships began to follow General Slocum. However, Captain Van Schaik made a disastrous decision. Instead of beaching the ship right away, General Slocum kept going. In fact, Captain Van Schaik would later say, there was oil lamps and factories nearby. I didn't want them to explode. I had to get the Slocum to a much safer place so she could be beached. During this, passengers were beginning to drown as the lifeboats continued to disintegrate, and everything got worse and worse. Even more tragic, many passengers were dragged under the paddle wheels and crushed to death by the paddle wheels. The female leader that once hugged herself that morning, saying it was going to be a lovely day, will be one of those unfortunate souls to die. When Captain Van Schaik decided to let the ship continue on her course, he actually fanned the fire, causing the fire to get more and more to the stern of General Slocum, causing many of the tugboats and steamers behind her to follow her as a chase began to ensue. As rescue boats continued to follow the ablaze General Slocum up the river. What made it more worse was that many of the passengers on board could not swim, and they began to drown. And mothers realized that even by touching the lifebelts themselves, they would disintegrate at their very hands. Many women were dragged by their own clothes. However, what's even more tragic, that even though many people had come to save, some people just came there to steal jewelry from those poor souls. They just took the jewelry and left the poor people out there to die, mostly women and children. Meanwhile, the General Slocum, still sailing up the East River, was becoming an blazing inferno. As many people came into the dockside to see what was going on, they were horrified to see what was once a beautiful paddle steamer become a blazing wreck, with many people screaming for their lives, only to be silenced by the fire themselves. Finally, Captain Van Schaik beached General Slocum at North Brother Island. However, things would just get way worse. When the ship beached herself, the top decks burst into flames and collapsed, crushing many people to their deaths. Finally, with the General Slocum stopped, many rescue boats arrived on the scene. However, some ended up crashing into each other as mayhem ensued. What even made more worse, that as Slocum began to sink beneath the waves, the water began to boil around her due to the great heat of the fire. Many passengers were scalded to death, and many people, as many of the rescuers tried to save them. Women and children screamed out in pain and terror. Captain Van Schaik it's unknown how Captain Van Schaik escaped. Some people say he was uninjured, but most say he was seriously injured. He lost sight in one eye after the disaster. He kept saying, my ship, my beautiful ship, seeing the beloved General Slocum burned up in flames. As husbands began to hear the news, they ran to the scene of disaster to see the terrible sight of the General Slocum, now burning out of control. Firefighters began to arrive to try to put out the fire on board the General Slocum, which had now been reduced to nothing but a burning out wreck. Her beautiful white body, with white oak and yellow pine, was destroyed. These pictures were the first scene of the disaster. After she was gutted, the General Slocum sank in shallow water. Since there was a hospital right down the road, many people were able to get into the rescue and get to be medical attended. However, bodies ended up on the shore of North Brother Island, as people began to realize what had happened. In the end of the whole disaster, there were 1,021 deaths and only 321 survivors, including Captain Van Schaik. Many families assumed the grim task of identifying the dead. However, many families were wiped out in the fire and sinking of Slocum. Judging that many families were on board the ship that day, mostly Germans, women and children. Husbands found bodies of their wives, their children, their sisters, their mothers. And it was, however, some people were able to see their loved ones live on, and were able to become reunited. Most of them, however, only left with the charred remains of their loved ones' bodies. After the whole ordeal, the question lingered on: what caused the exact fire? We shall never know what actually caused the fire in the lamp room that actually spread the entire ship. However, what happened after it in the inquiry will become controversial and very, very infamous. In the inquiry that followed, the inquiry pointed out that the hose on General Slocum had not worked, and many of the life jackets were literally crumbled to pieces. It was later found out that those on board that the inspection did not go according to plan, and they only inspected only the life jackets. They didn't even touch them. All they said were they were good, and that was it. The General Slocum sailed for 13 years without getting a complete inspection. Many of the life jackets were tied to and exposed to the elements. They were useless by the time of the disaster, and this caused the deaths of 1,021 souls. The accident was blamed on aging equipment and carelessness in the inspections. Van Schaik was also sentenced, along with many others of his crew, for not letting the ship beached at the exact time of that the fire was found. He only caused the fire to get more worse. Even though of his injuries, he was put solely to blame for the disaster. Van Schaik was sentenced to 10 years of imprisonment due to the inquiry not finding a suitable charge of manslaughter. Then, in 1911, he was sentenced on parole. He died in 1927, stating it was not his fault for the disaster. The Knickerbocker Steamship Company, which owned General Slocum, paid a hefty fine due to the disaster, and more inspections were made on each ship on each voyage. Even some people thought that the General Slocum's sister ship, which shall not be named, was on fire as well. However, this was only a theory. It did not really happen. But many people refused to board the General Slocum's sister ship due to the fire. Since many aboard were that of Little Germany, many people left Little Germany for more upper classes of New York, stating not to be near the site where many people lost their lives on June 15th, 1904. What's even more scary is that years before the sinking of the General Slocum, there was another fire, which resulting in many more lives. This wreck would later be unknown thanks to the story of the General Slocum. The General Slocum herself would see a new, different life. General Slocum was raised and rebuilt. She was rebuilt as the barge Maryland, but sank in 1911 as the Bad Luck. Then she was given the nickname Bad Luck Slocum. Her wreck has never been found to this day. There was no people lost in that sinking. The story of the General Slocum has almost been forgotten, but a book, Ship Ablaze, the tragedy of the steamboat General Slocum, has been made in honor of the General Slocum herself. And it's very shame to hear about such a beautiful ship. The Slocum was one of the most colorful sights ever seen in New York history. However, she was completely destroyed by the fire. She was the worst disaster in New York history until the events of September 11, 2001. No official feature-length film has been made in honor of General Slocum, but there has been a couple of documentaries made about General Slocum. And I hope by making this video, it will add a new chapter to the story of the General Slocum. And I hope by watching this video, you'll get to know what was the biggest wreck before the biggest disaster in New York City before 9/11. It was this one, the fire of the General Slocum. Such a beautiful steamboat, wrecked by a gigantic fire, which still unknown what exactly caused it.